Okay, so good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us. Tonight is the 5th day of Christmas, and we have George is joining us to do a workshop on basic fountain pen repairs and maintenance. We asked George to give a talk on fountain pen maintenance, and his first response was, which bit? So it's basically, we're going to pretend he's just picked up a pen from a charity shop, and he's going to go through how he'd go about cleaning it, any tweaks he'd give it, and anything that you want to ask, obviously feel free. You can put your questions into the chat, and I'll quite happily ask them, or I'm sure George will be quite happy for you to ask questions. As always, we have a sponsor for the event. Actually, we've got two sponsors for the event this evening. Gravitas Pens, Ben Walsh is going to gift one lucky winner a pocket pen in a choice of their colour, of the colour that they want, as long as it's in stock. And then the other sponsor this evening is Paper and Stift, and they are going to do a set of their exclusive inks for the lucky winner. So I will pin George, and I will hand over to you.
Thank you. I'm not 100% sure I'm going to stick to the brief, but let's try.
Excellent.
So, are we good to go?
I think so. I was just seeing if I could mute everybody else. I'm not quite sure how to.
Well,
so yeah, you carry on.
Right. So first of all, thank you very much for coming, all of you, and thanks to the admins for inviting me to talk about pen maintenance. Oh, here an echo.
Hang on, let me see if I can. Do you know how I mute it? Anybody? Oh, hang on. It's a busy one.
It should be in the participants. You should have an option to mute everyone. Then you have to unmute me.
Or we can mute ourselves. If everyone muted ourselves, that would be helpful, wouldn't it?
That'd probably be quicker, to be honest. Yeah, if everybody can mute themselves, that would be brilliant.
That'll be good. And it doesn't sound like it's got an echo. No, still good.
Hang on, bear with me.
There is two people in the same room, probably. That's why it's making like this. Maybe George, if you like something open, like a phone or something else, someone else.
I think I've turned everybody off but me now.
No, I think you should Google it, because I don't know how to do it, but maybe you should ask Google how to mute everybody. Maybe you'll find.
I can't see anybody else who's not muted.
Let's try again, see if this works.
Okay.
So, right. So thank you for coming, and thank you to the admins for inviting me. Who am I and why am I here? For those of you who don't know me already from the group, I'm Greek originally. I'm 58. I'm a dad of 2 girls and a boy, and I've been in England since 1984, pretty much. And I work in the software industry. So that's me. So like most of you, pens are just a hobby for me, right? I got intrigued after inheriting a couple of fountain pens from my dad when he died in 2003. At the time, I found someone here in Milton Keynes who was servicing pens, and I took them to him, and he showed me his shed where he was repairing pens, and I got absolutely fascinated with it. I bought a few more pens at the time, and then I stopped. Life kind of took over. Kids were growing up. I kept using a couple of pens, like my Parker 51 and my Schaefer for work, until just before the pandemic hit. And then I got intrigued with calligraphy, because I thought it might improve my handwriting. Spoiler alert, it didn't. Then I discovered that you can get cheap Chinese pens with zebra calligraphy nibs, which turned out to be a terrible idea because they don't work very well at all and they rust. But at that point, I was well and truly hooked into fountain pens. So I got into fountain pens in a big way. I started collecting, I started repairing, I started selling occasionally, a lot less than I'm collecting. And what keeps me in it is there's a constant learning curve. Every day I have something to do with pens. I have to go and research something. I have to go and look something up. I have to figure something. I have to look into their history. So that, for me, it's the thing that attracts me most about pens, as well as writing, of course, with them. So all of that history in the background is to say, I'm just an amateur, right? What I'll show you today works for me. It doesn't necessarily work for everyone else, but that's what I do, and that's what works. For real professional repairs, go to professional repairmen like Noah Masarani or Kevin Prime or Paul Leclerc or Steph Jackson. Or the repairman that all the other repairmen go to when they get stuck, which is Eric Wilson. And also, the other thing I want to say as a disclaimer is I'm not very good with nibs yet. So I'm finding my way around. I'm learning about nibs. So again, if you've got issues with nibs, talk to Noah, talk to Jose. We've got people in the group who are exceptionally good at dealing with nibs. So I'm learning. I'm trying to get my way around. So with that, let's talk about maintenance. I don't actually know what maintenance includes and what it means, because it's somewhere on the spectrum for me, from using a pen to reviving a 100-year-old antique and everything in between, right? So the most important maintenance for pens is cleaning them, right, for me. But then you get into repairs, and then you get to tweaking and fixing things. So let's start with some simple stuff before I start showing you anything. So there's some precautions, right? I'll start with the obvious ones. Don't drop your pens, right? So you don't have to fix them. It's pretty obvious, but pens have, for some bizarre reason, have a tendency to always fall down nib first, and they don't win against gravity, right? Nibs are notoriously difficult to repair. So please don't drop your pens. The other thing is, don't sit on your pens, and I've done that. They break. Unless it's one of Ben's pens, in which case the pen will be fine, but they're likely to cause you yourself serious injury, right? So, see, Steph, I put a plug in for our sponsors as well while I'm at it. So yeah, don't sit on your pens. It doesn't work. I've done it and I've broken pens, so avoid it, and ink goes everywhere. The other obvious thing is, don't leave your pens full of ink in a drawer for months. They do dry out, and they're very hard to clean. And it's not just that the ink dries out, they have a tendency to corrode, especially steel nibs and some of the finishes around the pen. And once they start corroding, there's very little you can do about it to be fixed. So that's the obvious stuff out of the way. The slightly less obvious stuff, rule number 1, and I'll come back to rule number 1. So remember rule number 1, never ever disassemble a pen above a sink. Things will go down the plug hole. You will lose them. I have done so. So that's rule number 1. And there's a few extra bits on the rule number 1. So it's not just above the sink. Just generally be careful what you disassemble things above. Bouncy surfaces. If you got a table that is sharp, things bounce and fall on the floor and go under furniture and go on the carpet, and the dogs get them. So pay attention to what is underneath when you disassemble pens in general. So, oh, and also don't be near a rubbish bin. So I have my desk where I do the repairs, and I have a rubbish bin next to it. I make sure that it's far, far away as possible, because things tend to, again, to drop in the bin, and you're not aware that it's there, and then it's gone. So that was rule number 1. Rule number 2 is optional, but wear gloves when you clean pens and work with pens, or use some kind of moisturizing hand cream, because they will affect your hands. I do neither. So ignore what I do and do what you're supposed to do, because you will end up with ink on your hands, and it takes a while to come off, and it dries up your hand. Rule number 3, keep plenty of kitchen roll to hand. Ink splashes. Whatever you do, however much you prevent it, ink will go everywhere. So make sure you've got plenty of kitchen towels around, whatever you do, work around pens, particularly cleaning them. Don't use force. If you have to use excessive force, chances are you'll probably break it, whatever it is that you're trying to force. So if you push or turn or twist and it doesn't come off, don't force it, because it will probably break. Rule number 5 is don't put everything back together. Once you've done the maintenance, once you've cleaned the pen, don't put everything back together until it has a chance to dry. Pens, particularly in caps, and particularly older pens, have got metal bits in them. If they stay wet and they don't get a chance to dry, they will rust, and they do rust. I've had several pens that have come to me, particularly Schaefer snorkels, that you open them up and they literally disintegrate from inside with the amount of rust that's in them. So let things dry, don't rust them. So that was all the background stuff I wanted to talk about. I'm going to transfer you over to the sink, but while I do that and I walk across to my utility room, has anybody got any questions so far before I switch over?
I can say that I watched some calligraphy nibs once, and they got rusted. So the rust thing is true, 100%.
Yeah, calligraphy nibs particularly rust, especially if you leave them wet, but you don't tend to leave them wet most of the time, so that's okay. But yeah, again, clean them before they dry out. So let's see if this is going to work.
I've got a question. Have you got gloves on?
I do not have gloves on. I will break my own rules, and I will definitely break rule number 1, because there's only one way I can use the phone at the moment to see what I'm doing, and there's no way I can not disassemble things above the sink.
So do as I say, not as I do.
Absolutely, absolutely. That's exactly the point. So one thing I wanted to say also is generally, most modern pens from the 50s and 60s onwards are okay with water, right? So washing them out is okay. There are some exceptions to that, and I'll come back to that in a minute when we talk about repairs. Let's assume for the moment that you have a pen that is okay with water, and I'll come back to that point. So let's talk about tools and things you need to do cleaning and maintenance. One important thing, plastic trays, right? These are full Chinese food takeaway trays, right? Especially if you try to clean multiple pens at the same time, trying to keep all the bits together that belong to the same pen. Not only because it's more difficult to lose them if they're in a container like this, but it also keeps them separate, so you know which bits go with which pen. So that's one. I use a mug. A mug is permanently here for this reason. I've got an old mug, and you'll see in a minute that is very, very handy for a number of different things. So dedicate a mug so you don't end up drinking your coffee out of it, and use it for cleaning. Kitchen roll, handiest thing to have around. very useful. Or if you follow Rose's example, puppy pads, also useful for drying things. So what else? An ear bulb syringe for flushing out pens. I'll show you in a minute. A blunt needle syringe. Very important that it's a blunt needle and not a hypodermic one, because you'll cause yourself an injury. Right. So make
Where
sure.
you bought it?
Sorry.
From where you bought the needle? Or
Sorry, I'm not.
Where did you buy the needle?
Oh, you can buy them on Amazon or eBay. You buy them in packs of 5 or 10. Don't buy the needle. You buy the whole thing basically. But make sure it's a blunt needle syringe. This one is a 10 milliliter one. I've got a smaller 5 milliliter, which I use for ink transfers and things. Permanently here on the cleaning station. What else? Bottle brushes. So again, I have one that I've inherited from a movie projector cleaning, but you can buy these brushes relatively cheaply on eBay or Amazon, and they'll work well. What else? I've got an old toothbrush, very abused over time, and yes, the resistance, an ultrasonic tank. The only thing I would say about the ultrasonic tank, and I'll show you in a minute, I'll use it in a minute, is be careful. Using electricity near water is never a good idea. So I tend to keep the ultrasonic separate and quite far away from where I am, from where I'm splashing water. Right? I will use it here today so you can see what it's doing, but don't. It's another one of these rules that I'm going to break. So let's get started. I have some pens here, which I will show you while I'm trying to clean them. They have not been cleaned, so I have no idea what I'm going to find. This one I bought on Sunday for this purpose, pretty much. So it's a Parker 55. They're very popular, they're very handy, and they're quite easy to clean. So like most Parkers, you'll probably find it with a dried up cartridge inside, and that's where you don't do things above the sink. Do you see? That ring just fell out. Now, if I didn't have a sieve, or if I wasn't lucky, this will have gone down the plug hole. So put it in that little tray in here for the moment. So I'll come back to the cartridge, because cartridges are useful to clean. These pens, you can give a quick wash, the barrel and the cup, but generally the caps are clean. Sorry, the barrels are clean. The cups will come back clean. And that's the part we want. So first thing first, water in the mug. You can give pens, depending on what state they're in, you can give them just a quick rinse first of all, because it looks, I don't know if you can see, but it's already getting a lot of ink out of the way that's from you running around in water. And that stops you getting all over your hands. So fill up your syringe with water from your mug, and you start splashing out ink. And I hope you guys can see what's happening, but basically it's forcing the ink out by splashing water through. Some pens are more susceptible to this, others are not. The older the pen and the more dried up the ink, the less this technique works. But for most modern pens and the pens you're using daily, this should be sufficient to clean up most of the ink. Right? Now, at the end of it, when your bulb is empty, it blows air out, and you'll be surprised how much ink comes. When you think everything is clean, you blow air out and a lot more ink comes out. So air is good in this case. So quick flush with water, take as much of the ink out as you can. Sometimes you just need to soak it. I tend to stick it in the mug with the water and leave it, and water will ink will bleed out. But
Water to be cold or hot?
Cold. Very rarely would I use hot water, and that comes down to the materials, and I'll talk about the materials in a minute. But most pens, most modern pens and things like the 45, you can just literally unscrew the nib section and it will come out. So now, once it comes out, there will still be quite a bit of ink in there. So again, give it a good rinse under the water, rinse the section on the side.
I've just got a question, George.
Yeah.
Tim's asking, would you say a fast flowing tap would be better than a bulb?
I would say no, because the pressure that comes out of the bulb is actually quite strong, and you won't replicate that with a fast tap. And the disadvantage of the fast tap is that it tends to knock things out of your hand, and things fall down and break and disappear and bits fall off. So I normally I would use it as a normal running tap like this. I wouldn't put any more force than that on a tap. The bulb syringe actually forces it quite a lot. Now, 45s, I don't know if you can see that clearly enough from there. Normally, the front comes out like this. It's a little collar. Here so you guys can see what I'm doing. I'm trying not to splash too much. And there's the nib coming off. That's the section, and that's the nib. Oh, there is a tool I forgot to mention, and it's this. I don't know what it's called. I nicked it from one of my daughters. I think it had jewelry in it, but it's a mesh pouch. So this is brilliant for putting little things like this nib inside, and the feed, and the little collet that's there. And
it's an organza bag.
Organza bag, thank you.
Yeah. No, that came from your audience.
Well, whoever said it, thank you very much. This is what it does. It keeps all of these bits so I can put them in the ultrasonic cleaner and not have to hunt for them. Now, my ultrasonic cleaner, I'll put it here so you guys can see it. Right. I don't know if it's visible. It should be a little bit. Right. It's got very clean water in it. It almost never is like this. This was done yesterday for the purpose of this show today. It usually is black with leftovers of ink and things that I've cleaned in it. So you can't find the nib in there easily.
Can you tell us what brand of ultrasonic you've got there, George?
If I can find it. It's called Sonic Wave. It's a 25 quid Sonic that I got years and years ago off Amazon, but Aldi has done them recently. It's really quite small, and that's all you need at this point. Another thing I forgot to mention. In the ultrasonic cleaner, I used this, which is ultrasonic cleaner concentrate for watches and jewelry, it's called. And I mean, this is a big bottle and lasts forever because you dilute this 1 part to 10 parts of water. So I always have a a ready-made diluted bottle of the stuff. And that's what I use in the cleaner. It tends to work better than water. I don't use hot water or anything like that, but that stuff works quite well with ink. So let me plug this in.
Ros has kindly put a link in the chat to the one that George has got.
Oh, well done. Thank you, Rose. So
I don't think it's the exact one, but it's the one I've got, and they're almost all exactly the same. They've just got
yeah,
the
they're all pretty much the same. You can get ultrasonic cleaners that are quite significantly more expensive, and you can control the temperature, you can control the frequency and other things. I never quite saw the need for it. But basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to drop the section in there, and I'm going to drop this little bag of goodies in there and just switch it on and just hope that it doesn't make too much noise and you can still hear me. It runs for about 3 minutes normally by default. So while that's going on, I'm going to take a different pen, and that's a Pelikan M200, which I have been using, and it's quite fresh, but I know it still has ink in it. So first things first, empty the ink. If you try and clean this with all the ink in it, it will go everywhere. Again, voice of experience. So first things first, take the piston out, get rid of any ink that happens to be there. Okay, it's not that much. Nope, that's it. So again, run it under the tap. You can see what color ink I had. Now, the advantage of Pelikans is they're quite easy to take the nib off. So the way to clean it is unscrew the nib unit, and it comes out in one go. Plenty of ink still coming. Now, this can go in the ultrasonic cleaner. I hardly ever bother with that, but it can go in the cleaner as well. And then you have the barrel. So, two things with this. If I use the tap into the barrel here, it will splash everywhere. So I try to avoid it. Either you have to do it very, very slowly, or you get your blunt syringe, fill it up with clean water from your mug, and then start washing it out in there. You can see how much ink still comes out from here. That avoids the first flush of water splashing ink everywhere. So you just need to do it gently enough to get most of the ink out, and then you can just run it under the tap if you need to. Now, what I tend to do here is I've got the piston all the way down to the front at the moment, so it's easier to clean. The piston cleans the barrel inside, and the front bit is only this much that has ink, so it's easier to clean. But then, if you want to completely clean it, take the piston all the way back, and pretty much repeat the same process. Oh, good.
Jerry's asking if there's any materials that you shouldn't put in the ultrasonic.
Yes, I'll tell you about that in a minute.
Okay.
It's not just materials, it's also specific pens. So I'll get back to that. So that's clean, pretty much. This, because it's fairly fresh, you won't have much more ink on it. So that's basically clean. And you take a kitchen towel and you put it at the side, which is now off camera, so apologies for that. And you just put them both there to dry. And that's that pen cleaned, basically.
Sorry.
Sorry,
I just had a very quick question. With the bulbs the bulb syringes, or whatever you want to call them.
This one.
Do they come in varying different widths for the aperture, depending on the?
Not really. So what I have done is I've chopped. I don't know if you can see. I'm close enough to. Actually, give me a second. I can pin myself because I'm not seeing myself pinned. Then I can see if it's sharp enough. Right. So I have chopped off a little bit of the top, so it's just wide enough for most sections, about the same width as most cartridges. So where's my section? Oh, it's in there. So I don't have it open here. Right. Take that out. So it's just enough to get stuck in there, basically. And the hole is about the same width as most cartridges. So if there's a pen with a lug where the cartridge goes on, it will go into the syringe as well. So it's not an exact science, but you just make it wide enough as it is. And yes, there are bigger sizes, and I'll talk about that in a minute. So taking things out of the ultrasonic, give them a rinse, because the stuff that's the ultrasonic cleaner shouldn't really stay on them, but they're now as clean as they will get. And you put them back on your kitchen towel to dry. Careful taking out the little bits. Again, they're wet, they're slippery, they're tiny, and you're above a sink. So, be very, very cautious how you take them out. So that's out. That's the feed. And the nib. They're all now completely clean. My hands are actually dirtier than the bits. So that's 2 pens done. I wanted to talk about a couple of special cases. Let me just check that I haven't forgotten anything so far. Oh, there is one thing I wanted to talk about, which is caps. Most of your normal working pens won't have an issue in the cup. Almost every antique pen that I pick up, or at a charity or at an antique shop, has caps that are full of ink. So the process is pretty much exactly the same. You first flush it out with some water with a syringe, just to make sure that any obvious ink comes out. This one seems to be okay. But then you get your bottle brushes and a bit of water, and you go to town. So nothing particularly complicated. This one happens to be quite clean. So, now, if anything keeps giving ink, soak it. Soaking works well, and I have soaked things up to days long, 2, 3, 4 days long, and it was still giving out ink, because dry ink takes a long time to loosen up and come out. So that was about caps. Some special things about pens. This is a Parker 51. Parker 51s, you can't follow exactly the same process. They have this aromatic filler. So the technique is a little bit different. So first thing I'll do, I'll just run it under the tap again, get most of the ink out of the way. And then you start pressing the filter while under the cup. And you see what happens. Suddenly ink starts coming out. Again, this is one that I've picked up. I have no idea how long it's been there, how long that ink has been happening. Now, I can sit here for an hour and do nothing else but this and ink will keep coming out. So if you're patient enough to do that for an hour, good for you. I am not. I haven't got the patience for that. So what I tend to do in that case is leave just a little bit of water at the bottom of the mug and just leave it in the mug, and I'll go away. And I'll come back to it. I'll make sure that it's full of water. Look in the mug already. So if I do that, if you can see it, there's plenty of water, of ink coming out. So what that does, it allows the water to loosen the ink and eventually will come clean. Parker 51s are notoriously difficult to clean. And the reason for that is actually part of the design. So if you look at a section of a Parker 51, this one has got a nib, but basically has this collector, it's called. It's like a feed, but it's a collector, which has very, very thin, if you can see it, it's got very thin fins on it, and that holds a hell of a lot of ink, which is great when you're using the pen because it allows it to flow very well, but it's a nightmare when you're trying to clean it, because if that ink is fresh, it will flush out with water. If it isn't fresh, all of this is stuck between the fins. So other than actually disassembling the pen and putting it in an ultrasonic cleaner and brushing it out, it's very difficult to get a Parker 51 collector to look like this. They don't look like that when you take them apart. So you can adequately clean a 51 to use it just by flushing water through it and leaving it to soak and then flushing more out until it stops giving ink. But it will never be 100% clean until it actually gets serviced. And only then you know it's properly clean. So that's a 51. The other one I wanted to talk about is a 61. So 61, I'm getting to older pens now. You see this beautiful 61, and you see that arrow that it has on the front. You'll find that a lot of 61s on eBay and marketplaces and things don't have that arrow. And the reason is that arrow comes off quite quickly and quite easily. So one of the rules is, this is a cartridge converter 61. Don't ever put a 61 in a ultrasonic cleaner. It really doesn't like it. It pops that thing off in the ultrasonic cleaner, and then it's difficult to put back on. So Parker 61s, flush them as much as you want with water, clean them with water, but don't put them on an ultrasonic cleaner. They don't like it. And this is the newer Parker 61s. The slightly older Parker 61s don't have a cartridge converter. Look. Missing arrow. It was there, it's not there anymore. They have this capillary system. So that doesn't come off. Typically it's full of ink, and the only way to clean it is let it soak in water. You get one of these bigger bulbs, fill it up with water, that fits snugly in there, and then you flush it through the capillary. And again, that takes a lot of work to clean out, so not a trivial process. If it's a 61 that's been maintained and cleaned and used regularly, it's not a problem. They work absolutely fine. If it's one that you found lurking around full of ink, good luck. They're not the easiest pens to clean. Right. What else did I want to say on the wet side of things? Oh, cartridges. Cartridges are very useful things. How are we doing for time? So I'll rush. So cartridges are very useful things, but again, they tend to have dry ink. So fill it in with a syringe, get most of the ink out. You can see this going everywhere. At some point, you'll see it looking clean. It's not clean. So we'll leave it in the sink. Come back in the morning, flush it again. There's a lot of ink collecting at the bottom of the cartridge here on this part, and it doesn't wash out normally unless you actually soak it. Once you soak it, it's fine. So that's the wet bit. I'm going to try and go back to the dry bench. Any questions?
There was just a question around, we said no to the using hot water, but quite a few people, including myself, use tepid water or slightly warm water. Would that be all right?
Yeah, you can use tepid water. You can use hot water as well. For most pens, it's not going to be an issue. It's not going to cause a problem. There are some pens that don't like it. The ones that use, especially older pens that use softer plastics, they get deformed with hot water. That section I showed you on the 61 wasn't in a great, that was missing the arrow. It didn't look too great exactly for that reason. So
we've got a question. Can you put vintage pen nibs in an ultrasonic cleaner?
absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. Not only that you can, it's probably your only chance of getting them cleaned properly.
And is Evernight or a gold nib okay?
Excellent question. Right. That's exactly what I was going to get to. So I know we're a bit short of time, but bear with me while I set this up. So this is where I normally work with pens. Not that I don't have a bouncy surface. It's a doormat. And it's very handy because things get attached to it and they don't fly off. So pens, right? These are hard rubber pens, or BCHR or BHR. You can hear them referenced in a lot of different ways, but basically they are hard rubber or vulcanite. They 20s and 30s pens look like this. This is quite a good example. It's not very worn at all. This is a eyedropper. So it literally, you just put ink in there and that's it. There's nothing else to do. Some come in good conditions like this one or this Stevens. You can tell a hard rubber pen quite easily, because if you rub it like this and then you smell it, it smells of burnt rubber. So you can tell if a pen like this is plastic or hard rubber by just rubbing it. They also come in this mottled red vulcanite, very pretty, but exactly the same principle. Hard rubber doesn't like water. It doesn't like humidity in general. It gets what I'm looking for. Mine's gone black. Basically, it changes color. Oxidize. That's the word I'm looking for. So it gets oxidized and it ends up looking like this, right? If you leave it with water or leave it with humidity or over time. You do find a lot of old hard rubber pens that look like this. They can be deoxidized. The special techniques and material to do this. It's not the most straightforward process. So generally, hard rubber, avoid water if you can. Hard rubber, on the other hand, loves heat. So if you go around to disassembling it or or repairing parts of it, use heat to loosen things up. They work quite well. So hard rubber, keep away from water. You get modern hard rubber pens. This is a Ranga, massive pen, but it's hard rubber. I find that more modern hard rubber tends to be more stable than the older one. It doesn't oxidize as easily, but it still does. So keep it away from water. Next material, which is interesting, is this, which is casein.
Is
Casein,
what, sorry?
casein, spelled C-A-S-E-I-N. So casein is basically milk. So this pen is made from milk. It was used in a transition period in kind of the 30s. You can see that it's kind of a little bit of a milky appearance and quite dull. That you can polish that out. It's a nice soft material. It's very warm to the hand. However, this one's obvious casein. This one, on the other hand, which is a Conway Stewart, isn't. It looks like a lovely acrylic or celluloid pen, but it isn't. And I know it isn't because when it came to me, it was much worse than this, and it has crazing all over it. So that had to be all polished out. So casein can be deceiving. Now, you can sometimes smell casein. So again, similar process with a hard rubber. It doesn't always work, but sometimes you can smell it and it smells like a bit like condensed milk, really. But you can't rely on that. So all the pens you always have to check. And when you leave casein, so it can create very nice pens. The disadvantage is if you leave this pen in water for more than a few seconds or a minute, it will start dissolving. It literally disintegrates in water and it splits up and it becomes horrible. And I have ruined a couple of pens that way because I didn't know and I wasn't aware that it was casein because I didn't look at it. So careful with pens. All the pens might be casein. Celluloid pens, very pretty, very nice, actually very tolerant as a material for water. Celluloid doesn't like heat. Celluloid is actually flammable, so don't put it anywhere near an open flame. But you can wash it out as much as you like. It has no issues with washing it, so wash it to your heart's content. Avoid hot water. They can deform sometimes, but generally water is fine. And then you get to pens like this, where you have no idea, right? I don't know if this is celluloid or if this is casein or this is a later plastic. I actually know it's probably celluloid because of the age it's in, but there are times that you just can't tell, you just don't know, in which case, just be careful, right? A little bit of water, quick run through, quick flush. The bit you really want to clean or repair is the front bit, this bit, and there's a way of taking it out and removing it with heat. I don't know if we have time to do this, but I will show you if we have time. Modern pens, no issues whatsoever. Most of them, you can just literally unscrew the nib unit, very much like we did with the Pelikan, and you clean the rest of the pen without an issue. It falls into bits. They can all be cleaned. They can all be put back together. Right, so make sure you keep things together, but basically they're easy to clean, right? Not a big deal. Metal pens, same story. The only thing with metal pens that you need to be careful that they don't scratch. Metal to metal scratches quite well. Ben's pens are quite good. They don't scratch easily. I have yet to scratch one. Things like this Parker 45 scratch easily. You'll see here. There's a I don't know if you can see it here, but there's a line from the cap being used on top of it, and that is very, very difficult to make invisible. It can be done, but it's really hard. So just careful with metal pens that you don't scratch them. That's all, especially gold and silver ones. Metal pens, gold has comes in pure gold, gold filled, rolled gold, gold plated. Rolled filled gold, gold filled, rolled gold, and plated tend to be the same thing. It just changes the description of how much gold is really in it. But the rolled gold is more stable, and it's got more thickness because it's a mixture of gold effectively, whereas gold plated and gold filled tend to wear off and create brassing. So if you polish them too hard, it does come off. What else? Oh, repairs. So I'm conscious that we're coming up on time. Do you want me to continue or not?
I think most people is there. I mean,
Yes,
I'm happy.
please.
Yes, please.
Yes,
There you
please.
go.
I'm happy to continue. I don't have a problem. So
Yeah, lots of yes, pleases.
repair tools. Put the pins out of the way before I make something. Oh, one thing I did not mention for cleaning. On things like Pelicans, you don't need to remove the piston, and you shouldn't remove the piston. That's really a kind of specialist thing to do. Some of the more modern piston fillers, like this Narwhal, you can remove the piston. You can use its own tools. I've got a different one, but you can use its own tool. You secure it, and remember, it's got the wrong way thread, so it's a left-handed thread. So you unscrew it by turning it right ways. So it goes like that. You leave the piston, leave the key in, otherwise you have a problem getting the distances right. Basically, the piston comes out. You can clean it, wash it, put a little bit of silicone grease, come back to that in a minute, on it, put it back, and repeat the process backwards. Screw it back together until it's in place. And then remove the cap, and you're done. So quite straightforward, and then it comes off the same way. You can unscrew it, so you can clean it quite easily. Plunge fillers or vacuum fillers. This is a cheap one, the more expensive ones. Principle is exactly the same, right? The mechanism is there. There will either be a ring here that you can take out and then take the piston out, or there will be a key like this that allows you to remove it. And you can take that out. So again, very similar principle as the pistons. Right, complete. Now, repairs. How do you take a pen apart? Actually, I'll try and do this one. So this is a Waterman with a broken clip. It's in pretty good condition. Okay. First thing to try is try and take the front out. You can't take the front out. Tool number one. Recognize this? Standard, straightforward hairdryer. So, apologies for the noise. Actually, I'm going to turn my microphone off for a moment because otherwise it'll be too noisy. Right, sorry for the radio silence. Heat is probably the only thing you need to be able to remove that section. So the tool I used is this. It's a section, instead of section pliers. That's how you find them in shops, in on-site online shops that sell pen repair kit. In fact, you can buy them from eBay or Amazon as spark plug removers. So it's exactly the same tool. So if anyone is interested in getting into repairs and you're looking at tools, send me a message. I have a file, which is my Chipskate tools file, alternatives, cheaper alternatives to most standard tools that you need for repairs and where I got them from. So happy to share that with you. You got the section out. There are two things. One, the section needs sorting out. Two, in here, there is a dried up sack. And if I can get a pen tray, otherwise we'll go everywhere. You need to start. So these are toothpicks, basically, as in dental toothpicks from dentist tools. So there we go. You're lucky. Sometimes you're lucky, and this comes out in one go. That is supposed to be a rubber sack. As you can see, it's not a rubber sack anymore. I'm not sure everything's cleaned up here.
Just a note, apparently they are, and I've lost it, they are spark plug pliers.
That's what I said. Spark, it's actually for taking the clip on top of the spark plug. They don't remove the spark plug. But yeah, spark plug pliers, if you look at them online, you'll find them. So the old sack is out, so a new sack can go in. So leave that inside for the moment. How do you disassemble this bit? There's something called a nib block, which is this. So you put your nib in here, and actually, of all the cheap tools I said that I get, that's the only one that's actually worth investing getting the real thing, because it just works, and every other thing I've tried just doesn't. It's messy and you get things wrong. So you basically, you see, I have not washed it or cleaned it or anything else, and that's actually a good thing in this case. I could have washed it a little bit, but not much. But basically, you hammer it out. It's very difficult to do this with a phone in front of you. So I'm sorry, I'll turn it around so you can see what I'm doing. Silence the microphone.
I don't think I'm brave enough to take a hammer to my pens.
George, can you use a chainsaw if you don't have one of those?
Absolutely, yeah. Just don't expect to have a pen at the end of it. So it needs more than I can do with a phone in front of me. To your point, Steph, I had exactly the same issue. I didn't dare do this until I went on a course for repairing pens, and I saw how to do it, and then I got more comfortable with it. So I'm doing a different one. Right, so this one is yielding. So basically, you do that, then you're left with a section and a nib and a feed. These can go in an ultrasonic cleaner. Now, the only thing I would say, older sections tend to be black rubber. Even if the pen isn't black rubber, the section probably is. So again, very quick with the water. Don't leave it standing in water. It will discolor. But the feed is not an issue. The nib is not an issue. So once it's out, stick it in the ultrasonic cleaner. I mean, give it a rinse first to get most of the ink off, and then put it in the ultrasonic cleaner, and it will be fine. and you could put it back together again. And then I'm accelerating the process a little bit here, but basically you find a right size sack. And if you start repairing pen, you'll end up with a lot of sacks. That's number 18. It's a little bit too small for this. So, number 19. So this isn't maintenance anymore, right? This is repair, basically. So you get to the length that you need. Just give me a second because I need to be able to cut on something. Very awkward doing this with a camera while talking, but there you go. So X-Acto knife, see how far it is, right? I'll cut that bit off. That's the first cut. And then you basically take your section and I forgot to tell you, this is not clean, right? So there's leftovers of around here of the old sack. So all that needs to be cleaned off as well, which I haven't done. But basically the sack, you cut the sack at the right length. And that way, you know now that once this is in place, I'm putting it temporarily over it, basically.
Yeah, I found that you don't make them too long. You don't use the too wide ones for
No.
the because I when I first started doing this, I put the biggest one the widest sack I could put in, and I found that then it then sort of flooded the pen. It got too warm and it didn't fit properly.
Yeah, it depends what mechanism is in place. So button fillers, you go a little bit on the small side. Lever fillers, not so much of an issue because there's a metal bar inside here that cools it off and there's ventilation. So it's less of an issue.
What I found with the swans is I tried to put in I looked up online and there's a certain sizes. They say oh, go for this size of sack, and actually you want to go one size down.
Yeah, probably. You don't want it too tight. It needs to be loosely going in and out without getting snagged. Basically, I'll put it on now just to show you, but once this is clean, you use shellac, which is a glue, a natural glue. You put shellac around the section, you put the nib over it, and you let it set. Once it's set, it's sealed basically at that point, and it goes back in the pen. And that is the most basic repair. You clean, you take it apart, you clean it. Once it's cleaned, you put it back together. And you have yourself a repaired pen. So then it gets complicated once you start looking at peculiar pens like Schaeffer's and button fillers and strange levers and old plunger fillers like Onoto's and so on. But the most basic repair is this. Two tools I didn't talk about. A loop, absolutely fundamental for doing any kind of repairs, whether you're doing nibs or just doing general repair. I'll be lost without my loop. And a bit of bicycle in a tight tube. Very handy for things like pulling out nibs. So most pens have screwed on sections. Things like this Jinhao don't. The nib and the feed are friction fit. So you can hold them like that, just pull your knuckles together, and it comes out. Then you have a section and a section.
Who is asking where you get your sacks from, George?
There's a place called Pendragon's. It's
What a
vintage,
great name.
vintagepenparts.com, I think. Bear with me a second, I'll look it up. Yeah, Pendragon's is vintage pen, sacks and parts, all one word, .com. I'll put the link in the chat.
I have a tip for I mentioned it in the chat, for a nib block, because the nib blocks are quite expensive. They're very expensive.
Yeah.
And what you can do is you get imperial drill gorge. You get these metal sheets, which have got imperial sizes, not metric. And they've got lots of holes, and they all match up into the nib sizes, because of course it was all imperial. So yeah, you get one of those, and then you can put it on $2. I know it's not as good as a proper nib block, but it's way cheaper.
To be honest, it does work, but it's quite thin. So if you hammer too hard, it does bend, and you need one of these tubes really to be able to put it on top so you don't lose the bits underneath. So I tried this. I've tried drilling my own wood blocks. I've tried all sorts of things, and in the end I gave up and I paid the 25 quid, whatever it was, and got the proper thing. It's one of the few investments that I've absolutely not regretted buying. So right, so
Is any loop effective, or would you say that you get what you pay for?
any loop?
Loop.
No, there are good quality loops and bad quality loops. Bad quality loops are adequate for a lot of things. Good quality loops are absolutely great. I have one of these, which I do use occasionally, which goes over your head and you look through it, and it's got 2 rings. I got it off eBay, Amazon. The advantage of this is that it gives you
Your hands free.
3 hands.
Yeah.
And you can look through it. I'm not comfortable with it. I don't like it that much. I prefer to have my loop. The issue with the loops I have, so you buy loops as you go on. I've got this one. I've got this one, which is also illuminated. They're great. I find them too strong. So this one is a 3.5 times loop only. These are supposedly 30 times and 40 times loops. They are superb for doing things like nib work, because you can really look at the nib very, very closely and see the details and see what you're doing with the tines and everything else. I don't know if you guys can see this. It's shining too much. But basically, for very tiny work, they're good. For anything else but that, they're pretty useless because the magnification is too high. So for general purpose work on pens, I use this, which is I've had for 30 years or so. It's plastic. It's not very expensive. It wasn't very expensive at the time, but it works. And I'm used to having it in my eye and still having 2 hands available. But if it's uncomfortable, use one of the head.
Do you recommend 30 times?
No, 30 times for me is too high. So anything between 3 and 10, I would say.
Right.
It also depends what kind of glasses you need normally. But I'm blind with that. So I think for most purposes, the between 3, 4, and 10 is okay. is what you mostly will use. Other things that are useful to have: ink. You use a lot of it when you repair pens because you test nibs. Toothpicks, cotton buds. I go through this at an incredible rate because they're very useful for cleaning. They're very useful for putting a little bit of grease, for testing inks, all sorts of things. So these are just household stuff that you have and use all the time.
There's
So-
a couple, sorry. There's
So
a
go
couple
on.
of questions around cleaning that we didn't get. One was, is there any sort of cloth that you'd recommend instead of using kitchen roll? Like a microfiber cloth or something?
Yeah, so for things like cleaning, dry cleaning and polishing, yes. So microfiber cloths, very good for that. Not for wet. For anything that's involving water, I find kitchen towel is the handiest. You can get this kind of industrial rolls of paper like they have in toilets or hospitals. They're a lot cheaper than toilet towels, but they're also a lot rougher, so they don't hold as much water. So I find kitchen towels from Costco the
Okay.
best price for performance. If that makes any
And,
sense. The conversation about kitchen towels.
And what's your view on cleaning fluids?
Cleaning fluids, right. So I don't, let me just switch off. I don't want to show anything else. I'll switch over to my normal camera so I can talk to people. Right. So cleaning clothes, liquids, basically. I would use Diamine's nib cleaning fluid, or stubborn nibs that I can't get clean, or stubborn sections that I can't get clean. I would dip them and leave them in Diamine nib fluid. It does work. It works quite slowly and is not spectacular. Any other cleaning liquids I tend to avoid because I don't know whether they've got solvents or not. So solvents and plastics don't mix very well, including things like WD-40, which I tend to use for most things in my life, including taking wax off my daughter's armpit, which she messed up. But keep it away from pens. It's not very good for plastics in pens. Soapy water, if you need to. The only thing I do use is household ammonia. So for metal parts, particularly metal parts that have rusted, a 1 to 3 solution of household ammonia to water works very well for cleaning them up and removing rust, etc. Use it with caution. Wear gloves. Don't let your dogs near it. That kind of thing. So usually health and safety. It's strong.
So just a very quick question about celluloids,
Yeah.
especially on some of the vintage ones. When they start to yellow, is that a case of it's completely yellow, or is there any chance of restoring from that?
There is little chance of restoring it. Mostly if it yellows, it means there's fumes from the sac, the rubber from the sac that has been disintegrating inside or reacting to the ink. Also, don't leave celluloid pens in tightly shut drawers or boxes. They need ventilation. Apparently they reach, and I don't know this for a fact myself, but I've read about it. They reach a certain point in their lifetime when they turn and they start becoming brittle and exuding fumes that affect other pens next to them. So if you've got a bunch of celluloid pens in the box that's tightly shut and one of them starts going off, it will trigger all the other ones to go off as well. So people who deal with vintage pens a lot. Say, make sure that if you have them in drawers, that either they're well ventilated or you ventilate them regularly. For that reason.
I used to be an archivist, and we were always warned about celluloid film for the same reason, because if it wasn't ventilated, it would start to degas, and you could have them going spontaneously combusting and burning everything down.
Celluloid is very flammable as a substance, so that's why there are some older repair books that talk about using open flames to remove sections and so on, and yeah, and it can be done if you know exactly what you're doing and you have experience, but naked flames in pens, again, not a great idea. I used the hairdryer earlier. I have got a proper air gun which has got temperature control on it. It lives in my garage. It's clumsier to use. It's better because you can make sure you don't go above 150 degrees Celsius or so, and you don't melt pens. I have gone higher, and I've just back to experiment, and I have seen a Schaefer kind of collapse. But the hairdryer for most cases will work fine. You put it on a high setting and make sure you keep going over it and evenly heating up the pen, and eventually it will yield most of the time. Yeah, I agree, Tim. Yeah.
Any other questions?
Because I've missed anything on the chat, so
I think I've kept up with most of it. If I haven't, you
know where to find me, guys. If you have questions or if you want more information, ping me. I'm happy to answer questions. Go on, Edmund. With the shellacking, yes. Do you just put on what very, very little around the barrel of the section, or are there tricks? Or? Yeah, it's not that critical. It doesn't have to be that little. You can be, I mean, obviously don't flood it through, but I can actually show you. Hold on. Switch over to the camera. I'm gonna have to clean this again anyway, so I might as well. So yeah, don't flood it, but you need a good strong layer of shellac around it. This one's got a ribbed section, so it works a little bit differently, but I'm not flooding it, but I'm also quite liberal with it. Now, the problem is there's special tools for stretching this to go over the shellac. And if you're not careful, it goes everywhere. But with a little bit of experience, you can get it to just sit like that. And that's all it is. Turn it a little bit to make sure it's spread around. And that's literally it. And this is a COVID leftover, in case you haven't seen it. It works perfectly for leaving that in there to dry. So you just stick it in there, leave it for at least an hour, and then you can go ahead with it. Perfect, thank you. No idea what I've just selected now, but anyway, I'll probably take it apart again later. So yeah, you don't be too stingy, because if it's too stingy, either it won't seal, it won't cover it properly, or it will come apart again easily. There's quite a lot of pressure that goes on the sack when it's stretched. So when you use levers, force multiplies, right? So if you take a lever pen and it squashes the sack, what it does, it actually also pulls it off the nibble at the same time. And if that shellac doesn't hold it, it will literally come off. So it needs to be enough.
And how does a button filler work? When you push it at the back and it squishes the
Yeah.
sack outwards
So,
that way?
so it has got a. You're gonna make me change again. I should have moved to the other side. I can't do both cameras.
I've planned this perfectly.
I can't do both cameras at the same time, right? So, button filler, right? One thing I did not show you is my desk is full of these. I have different boxes. As I take apart pens to fix, they live in a box because I lose bits and I mix things up. So I've got a whole stack of pens, and my advice is, sorry, a whole stack of boxes. My advice is make sure you stick to one pen in one box, because otherwise it gets very confusing. But basically, button fillers have these things in them. So that is a pressure bar. So what happens is that goes into the pen from the back and stops. Can do things with the camera. So it will basically go and stop here, right next to it, and it can't go any further. So when you press the button, sorry, I'm holding it the wrong way around, that way around. So when you press the button, what it does this. And squashes the sack. So similar to the lever, but it's just a bit more awkward. So if you repair one of these, you put the sack on the section, put the sack in the section in first, in place, then you kind of slot this bar around on the side of the sack, and when it's in, then you put the button in place, back in.
Oh, fascinating. Thank you.
So there you go, that's in place now, so it just buttons in like that.
Amazing.
Question from the chat. Any suggestions for disassembling a stuck 3D printed pen? It's an addictive ribbon pen.
So I would say, first of all, I see a screw fit or a push fit. Your best bet is to talk to whoever made it, because there are 100 different ways of making 3D printed pens, and it really depends what technique they used. If they've used normal threads, you should be able to kind of loosen it enough, maybe with a little bit of heat, to take it out. If it's push fit, similarly, you can kind of wiggle it a bit. 3D printed materials tend to be fairly flexible. They're not that rigid. So you should be able to just wiggle it out. But if in doubt, talk to whoever made it and say, how do I take it apart?
It's acrylic. Shall try heat?
Yeah, a little bit of heat. But again, best advice I can give you is talk to whoever made it, because they will inevitably have had a similar problem that they had to solve, and they will know how to do it, or they will offer to do it for you. But yeah, a little bit of heat would definitely help.
What I'm going to do is, in a second, I'll turn off the recording and then we can carry on chatting. Just before we do that, I wanted to announce tonight's winners. So the I did the random number generator at about 10 minutes ago, and there were 43 people still here.
Great.
So we maxed at 48, and a couple of people said that they had to go, but so the winner of the Gravitas pocket pen is Bowie Chong. I'm not sure how you pronounce your surname, sorry, but I think I've actually got your address, so I will get that organised for you. And the winner of the ink is actually Hannah Cornish. So if you could drop me a DM with your address details, I will get both of those arranged for you. And I'll turn the recording off now.
Thank you all.